Yesterday, the French government collapsed once again when Prime Minister François Bayrou was ousted in a confidence vote that he himself had called. This is the second Prime Minister which President Emmanuel Macron has appointed and lost since he called a snap election in the summer last year. That's a massive stain on his presidential legacy, but more importantly, it can spell trouble for what's to come. More political chaos and a failure to address major economic issues of the short to medium term. In this video, I will give you a quick, simple guide to how the complicated French political system works. I'll give you a quick history of how we got here, the fiscal reality behind the crisis, and I'll take you through what the future of French politics now looks like. And so let's begin with the system. France has a semi-presidential system. This is fancy talk for a country with a president and a prime minister. The president is directly elected every 5 years and serves two very important direct roles. Firstly, they're by and large responsible for foreign and security policy, and secondly, they appoint the government. Of course, I need to caveat here that the government needs to also have support from parliament. The prime minister and their cabinet is responsible for the day-to-day runnings of the state apparatus and for passing their legislation through parliament. Now, obviously, the president, though, has some degree of influence over legislation and over the government. The French parliament is a bicameral system. That means there's a lower house and an upper house. The upper house, or the Senate, has indirectly elected members and is the less powerful of the two. While it's there to scrutinize in a less overtly political manner, it can indeed be overridden by the lower chamber. In many practical ways, it's similar to the House of Lords in the UK. The lower house, or the National Assembly, is where the action happens. And this is the chamber that forced Bayrou out. The National Assembly is made up of 577 members of parliament, or deputies. And the current crop of deputies were elected in a snap election last year. France has a massively impressive network of small, diverse parties across the country. But helpfully, the smaller parties gather themselves in parliamentary groups with bigger or medium-sized parties. And these parliamentary groups can be further simplified to about 3 or 4 blocks. The first being the Popular Front, an alliance of left-wing parties, including the old centre-left Socialist Party. The second bloc is the ensemble alliance of centrist liberal parties, including Macron's Renaissance and Bayrout's Democratic Movement. The third bloc, which is sometimes lumped in with the previous one, is the Republicans and the Right, the traditional centre-right party and their allies. And finally, the National Rally and their alliance. This is the nationalist populist right, led by the party National Rally. In this parliament, the Ensemble Alliance has worked with the Republicans, but that's still not enough to form a majority. So they have relied on a bit of goodwill from interchangeably the Popular Front and the National Rally. But that's nowhere to be found now. So let's turn to a bit of background, starting with the past 14 months. Last summer, after some very poor results for Macron at the European election, he decided to take a bit of a political gamble by calling a snap election. The populist right-wing National Rally did very well in the European election, and Macron's calculation seems to have been that voters wouldn't be as keen to vote for the party in a parliamentary election where they felt that they had more at stake. And while the hard right didn't do as well as it had perhaps hoped due to the two-round voting system, the left-wing coalition, the Popular Front, won the most seats. With his gamble not paying off, Macron was forced to come up with a prime minister that wouldn't be toppled. It took him 2 months to find someone who could clear the first hurdle and win a confidence motion. He first found Michel Barnier, a Republican who is best known as the European Union's chief negotiator during the Brexit back and forths. Barnier initially received tacit support from the National Rally, but this collapsed when after a mere 90 days they joined the left-wing Popular Front to oust him in a vote of no confidence. This after Barnier forced through a budget with tax rises and government spending cuts. Macron then had to find a new prime minister, and he did so with another, more centrist ally, François Bayrou, the leader of the Democratic Movement and a former justice minister. Bayrou's government again was forced to rely on careful support from the National Rally after an attempt to get support from the socialists failed. Bayrou has made the main goal of his government the economy, specifically with a focus on reining in the budget deficit and bringing down the spiraling government debt. So let's quickly look at that. The fiscal situation. France is in a really tricky fiscal position. At a time when the vast majority of economies in Europe are facing some existential question or other, France is one of the most problematic. The fiscal problem that's been receiving the most attention is the budget deficit and the growing government debt. Last year, France ran a budget deficit of almost 170 billion euros, meaning the government spent 170 billion more euros than it received. Running a deficit in some years is okay, as long as you make up for it or your economy grows at a rate where paying back the interest on the loan is manageable. But that's not the case in France. This last deficit adds to an already massive amount of debt of over 3 trillion euros, almost 115% of the annual GDP. France's economy only grew by 1.2% last year, when healthy growth for a developed country is between 2 and 3%. Add on top of that the fact that France's productivity rate, essentially how much value of goods and services is produced per hour worked, is decreasing. Oh yeah, and investors are losing faith in France, which makes it more expensive for the government to borrow money. Their 10 and 30-year government bond yields are incredibly high. This also means that France's national interest payments are shooting through the roof. This year, the country is looking at 66 billion euros just in interest payments. And this is all pretty bad, and the country is in a position where it needs to balance its budget very, very soon. And the obvious approach is to cut spending, which makes sense, because France is the country in Europe with the highest government spending in relation to GDP. But that's obviously not politically popular. And that's what's led to the Bayrout crisis. When Bayrou came to power, his main goal was to put an end to the spiraling government debt. So he's put together a budget that would cut government spending by almost 44 billion euros next year. The budget included cuts to more government hiring, ending pension indexation to inflation, and taking away 2 paid holidays to increase GDP output. This after Macron forced an increase to the pension age from 62 to 64 a couple years before. Unsurprisingly, this is not popular with both the left-wing bloc and also with the right-wing bloc. But it's also very unpopular across the country, with a movement having taken shape over the past weeks calling for a national strike all across France to take place tomorrow. Realizing the gig was up, but refusing to stand down on his target of lowering the budget deficit, Bayrou called for a vote of confidence in himself. It quickly became clear that he would be ousted in this vote, as neither of the 2 opposition blocs decided to back him. But when the votes were counted, it was even worse for him than expected. 364 deputies voted against him, only 194 for him, suggesting some deputies from the Republican and right-wing bloc voted against him from within the coalition. Earlier today, he handed in his formal resignation to President Macron, which means we now await Macron's next move. Macron has a couple of options. The most likely is that he will try to appoint a new prime minister, perhaps someone who could get a more full-throated backing from either the National Rally or a part of the Popular Front, perhaps the Socialists. If he tries to work with the left, he could perhaps go with Socialist Party leader Olivier Faure. If he tries to stay in the center-to-center-right lane, the favorite appears to be current Minister of the Armed Forces Sébastien Lecornu, from within Macron's own party. But this is going to be incredibly difficult for him. He's had 2 prime ministers come and go since the snap election last year, and the left and right-wing opposition blocs have every political incentive to maintain the turmoil. Macron's second option would be to call another snap election, but polls right now are close to where they were last year. The only difference seemingly would be that the Republicans would pick up a few seats from the Ensemble Alliance, which wouldn't really move the needle. If after a snap election the political turmoil ensues, that would be detrimental to the country and the way it's viewed by especially the markets. And so the final nuclear option would be for Macron to resign as president. Macron has previously said that he will serve the rest of his term, but could he perhaps be pushed to a place where he sees no other option? Well, the Popular Front are trying to push a parliamentary motion to remove Macron, but it's expected to fail. That's because it would need 2/3 backing in both the chambers of parliament. So for now, it seems that the likeliest outcome is that France is due to wait for Macron to announce the next prime minister, and for the rest of the world to watch as this poor soul tries to work under a troubled parliamentary distribution and a frightening fiscal situation. But what do you think? Where do you think France is headed? And do you think Macron should resign? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.